story I'm about to tell you came from my Uncle Daniel. Now, my uncle wasn't the kind of guy who told ghost stories for attention. Honestly, he hated talking about emotional stuff at all. He worked construction most of his life, drank black coffee like water, and thought people who believed in paranormal things were idiots. So, when he told me this story during Thanksgiving back in 2018, and I saw his hands shaking while he said it, I knew something about it was real. What made it even stranger was the fact he refused to let me record him. He said if I wanted to remember the story, I should write it down instead. And before he started talking, I remember him staring out the kitchen window for a really long time, like he expected somebody to be standing outside in the darkness. Then he said something I'll never forget. Some people disappear because they want to, and some disappear because something else decides they should. My Uncle Daniel grew up in western Montana, around 40 minutes outside a small town called Libby. Back in the late 70s, that area was mostly endless forest, logging roads and mountains that looked completely black once the sun went down. The kind of place where everybody owned rifles, everybody knew everybody, and nobody bothered locking their doors. Daniel was 19 when this happened, and according to him, there was one place everybody avoided after dark: an abandoned fire lookout station. Deep in Kootenay National Forest, officially, the place had been shut down after a lightning fire damaged the tower sometime in the early 60s, but people around town had their own explanations for why. Nobody went near it anymore. Hunters claimed they heard voices near the tower. Teenagers said radios stopped working. Along the access road, one old logger swore he saw somebody standing inside the tower during a snowstorm, even though the staircase had collapsed years earlier, but nobody really liked discussing it, because in tiny towns like that, you learn pretty quickly that certain subjects make people uncomfortable for a reason now. Daniel didn't care about any of those stories back then, at least. Not yet. He had a friend named Eric Lawson, and Eric was exactly the type of guy horror. Stories always begin with loud, fearless, stubborn. If there was an abandoned building nearby, Eric wanted to break into it. If locals warned him not to go somewhere, he'd go there twice just to prove he wasn't scared. And one Friday night in October of 1978, Eric showed up outside Daniel's house with a flashlight and a six-pack of beer, saying they were finally going up to the old fire tower. Daniel told me he almost said no. Not because he believed the stories, but because strange things had already been happening around town that week. Dogs had started disappearing, not dead, not injured, just gone. 3 in the same week, and multiple people reported hearing whistles in the woods late at night, not animal noises, human whistles, slow, uneven, off-key, like somebody trying to imitate a song they didn't completely remember. But Daniel went anyway, because when you're 19 years old, embarrassment feels a whole lot scarier than danger. So around 10:30 that night, they drove Eric's pickup truck north toward the mountains. Daniel remembers the road being unusually quiet. No insects, no wind, not even the sound of tree branches moving. And the farther they drove into the forest, the worse the feeling in his stomach got. At one point, Eric turned the truck radio louder to break the silence, but all they got was static. Not normal static either. Daniel said it sounded almost wet somehow, like whispering directly into a microphone. Eric joked about it at first, but after a few minutes, even he turned it off. Eventually, they reached the old access road close to midnight. The tower stood at the top of a hill overlooking miles of dark forest. Even in the moonlight, it looked wrong. Somehow, too tall, too thin, like it didn't belong there anymore. The staircase leading to the lookout platform had mostly rotted away, but part of it still hung from the side of the tower, swaying slightly even. Though there wasn't any wind, Daniel said that was the first moment he genuinely wanted to leave. But Eric was already climbing, laughing, mocking him for looking nervous. So Daniel followed, and halfway up the staircase, he noticed something that made his stomach drop. Fresh, muddy footprints, bare footprints, human ones. Eric saw them too. But instead of getting scared, he got excited. He kept saying, maybe. Squatters were living up there. Maybe they'd catch some. Drifter hiding inside the tower? Daniel told him they should. Leave. Eric ignored him completely. And when they finally reached the top platform, they found the tower door slightly open, just enough for darkness to spill. Through the crack, Daniel said, the smell hit him first. Wet. Wood, mold, and something metallic. Underneath it, something that reminded him of pennies. Eric pushed the door open wider. Inside was mostly empty, an old desk, broken radio, equipment dust covering everything. But in the center of the room, there was a folding chair facing the window, and beside it, a cassette recorder, still running. The tape inside made a faint clicking sound, like it had already reached the end. But nobody bothered stopping it. Eric picked it up immediately, and against Daniel's better judgment, he pressed rewind. The sound of the tape spinning filled the room. Then a voice started playing. At first it was difficult to understand. A man breathing heavily, talking quietly. But after a few seconds, Daniel realized the man was repeating coordinates. Over and over, and over again. Then suddenly the voice changed. Panicked, crying. The man on the tape kept whispering. He keeps standing outside at night. He keeps copying my voice. Don't answer him if he sounds like me. And then the tape went. Silent, not static, not interference, just silence. For almost 20 seconds before another voice spoke. This one calm, soft, almost friendly. And Daniel swore on his life. That second voice sounded exactly like Eric. The tape said, Daniel, come outside for a second. Both of them froze instantly, because the real Eric was standing right beside him. Neither moved then. From somewhere below the tower, they heard the exact same sentence again. Not from the tape this time. From outside, Daniel. Come outside for a second. Daniel said every hair on his body stood up the moment that voice came from. Below the tower, Eric dropped the cassette recorder, so hard it cracked against the wooden floor. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them moved. And then, from somewhere underneath the lookout platform, something started climbing the staircase. Not walking, climbing. With this horrible, uneven rhythm. Thunk, drag, thunk, drag. Like whatever it was. Didn't fully understand how human movement worked, and the entire time, it kept speaking in Eric's voice. Calmly, almost playfully. Daniel, you forgot your flashlight. Except Daniel was still holding his flashlight. That's when Eric finally panicked. He rushed toward the nearest window and pointed his flashlight down toward the staircase, and the second the beam hit the steps, Eric screamed. Not yelled, not cursed, screamed, the kind of scream people make when their brain suddenly stops understanding what they're looking at. Daniel looked too, and to this day, he refuses to fully describe what he saw down there. The only details he ever gave me were these. It had a human face. Its arms were way too long, its joints bent wrong, and its mouth kept opening and closing, like it was practicing words before speaking them. Then the thing stopped climbing completely. It just stood there. Halfway up the staircase, motionless, its head tilted upward, slowly toward them, and in Eric's exact voice. It whispered, "You left me down here before." Eric completely lost it after hearing that. He shoved past Daniel, burst through the tower door, and started climbing down the staircase as fast as possible. Daniel screamed at him to stop, but Eric was already disappearing. Into the darkness below, Daniel stayed frozen inside the tower for maybe 5 or 6 seconds, trying to process what he'd just seen. And then suddenly, everything became silent again. No footsteps, no voices, no movement, nothing. That silence scared him more than the screaming did, because now he had no idea where the thing was. Eventually, Daniel forced himself toward the staircase. His legs were shaking so badly, he almost fell twice climbing down. But when he finally reached the ground, Eric was gone. Not near the truck, not near the trees, nowhere. The only thing left behind was Eric's flashlight lying in the dirt, still turned on. Daniel picked it up and started, shouting his friend's name into the woods. Nothing answered at first. Then maybe 30 seconds later, he heard movement far off between the trees. Heavy. Movement. Something big. And then Eric's voice suddenly yelled, "Daniel, over here?" Daniel almost ran toward it, almost. But something about the voice felt wrong. Not fake, exactly. Just slightly delayed, like every word came half a second. Too late, and then the voice called again. "Closer this time, Daniel. I hurt my leg. Come help me." Daniel told me the reason he survived that night was because he finally listened to his instincts. Every part of his body was telling him not to follow that voice. So instead of running toward it, he backed away slowly toward the truck, and as he did, the forest around him suddenly filled with whistles. Dozens of them, different directions. Different distances. Some close enough to sound right beside his ear, others deeper in the woods. All of them. Off, dash key, dot, all of them wrong. Daniel jumped into the truck, locked the doors immediately, and tried starting the engine. Nothing happened. The truck wouldn't start, and while he kept turning the key over and over, he noticed movement near the tree line, tall shapes moving between the trees, not one, multiple. At first he thought they were people. Then, one of them stepped into the moonlight, and he realized its arms. Hung almost to its knees, the thing stood. They're staring at the truck, perfectly still. Then slowly, its mouth opened, and in Eric's voice it said, "You left me here before." Daniel slammed the gas pedal again while turning the key. This time the engine roared to life, and the second the headlights turned on, every shape near the trees disappeared instantly like they'd never been there at all. Daniel drove back toward town, faster than he'd ever driven in his life, and the whole time, he kept checking the rearview mirror because he swore something was running alongside the truck through the trees, keeping pace with him. He made it home just before sunrise. His parents immediately knew something was wrong. Daniel looked pale, shaking, covered in mud. At first he tried lying, tried saying Eric probably wandered off drunk somewhere in the woods. But once police started asking questions later that morning, he finally told them everything. Well, almost everything. He never mentioned the creature, never mentioned the voices, because even back then, he knew how insane it sounded. Search teams spent almost 2 weeks looking for Eric Lawson. Dogs tracked his scent deep into the forest, then suddenly lost it completely. No blood, no torn clothing, no body, nothing. And officially, Eric Lawson was declared missing in November of 1978. But according to Daniel, that wasn't the scariest part, not even close. Because 3 nights after Eric disappeared, Daniel woke up around 2 o'clock in the morning after hearing pebbles hitting his bedroom. Windowed at first, he thought local kids were messing with him, but when he pulled the curtain aside, he saw somebody standing near the tree line behind the house, tall, perfectly still, and even from that distance, Daniel recognized Eric's jacket. For 1 second, he actually felt relieved. He thought maybe his friend survived somehow. Then the figure slowly raised one arm and waved. That's when Daniel noticed something impossible. The arm was too long, way too long, long enough for the hand to hang, almost near its knees. Then the figure spoke in Eric's voice, perfectly calm. "Daniel, come outside for a second." The exact same sentence, the exact same tone. And my uncle realized whatever was standing near those trees had been practicing. Daniel never saw that thing near the trees again after that night, at least. Not directly, but for the next few months. Strange things kept happening around town. People reported hearing whistles outside their homes after midnight. Hunters claimed they heard voices deeper in the woods. calling their names. One woman swore somebody knocked on her back door during a snowstorm using her dead husband's voice, and every now and then, someone driving near the old forest road would report seeing lights glowing where the fire tower used to stand, even though there hadn't been electricity up there in decades. Daniel tried convincing himself it was all paranoia, that his brain was turning ordinary sounds into something sinister because of what happened to Eric. But then winter came, and things got worse. One night in December, Daniel was helping his father repair fencing behind their property when the sun started going down faster than expected, the forest behind their land looked completely black by the time they finished. And while they packed tools into the truck, Daniel heard something whistle from the trees. 3 short notes, then silence. His father heard it too. Daniel could tell immediately from the expression on his face, but instead of reacting normally, his father just froze completely, then quietly said, "Get in the truck." No explanation, no hesitation, just fear. Real fear. Daniel asked him what was wrong. His father ignored the question. They drove home in silence. And later that night, after a few drinks, his father finally admitted something. Back in 1959, years before the fire tower officially closed, 2 forestry workers vanished near that same mountain. Search teams found one of them 3 days later wandering barefoot near the highway. The man was dehydrated, hypothermic, and completely hysterical. But according to reports, he kept repeating the same sentence over and over. "It sounded like my brother." The second worker was never found, and after that incident, multiple firefighters stationed at the tower started reporting strange things, voices outside at night, people knocking on the tower door after midnight, figures standing between trees, watching them. One man supposedly quit after hearing his own voice calling to him from the woods while he was alone. Daniel asked his father why nobody ever talked about it, and his father gave him an answer that honestly made the entire story worse, because he said, talking about it only made people go looking. That sentence stuck with Daniel for years, because deep down, he realized everybody in town knew something was wrong with those woods. They just refused to say it out loud. Not because they didn't believe it, but because they did. About 6 months after, Eric disappeared. Spring finally arrived, and with spring came loggers returning to the deeper parts of the forest. One afternoon, a logging crew reported finding an abandoned campsite around 7 miles from the fire tower. Most of the tents were collapsed, food, supplies were still sitting out untouched, and according to the workers, it looked like whoever owned the camp had left in a hurry. But the strangest part was what they found nailed to one of the trees nearby, a cassette recorder. Old and covered in dirt, still functioning. Police took it as evidence, and somehow, Daniel eventually heard what was on the tape. At first it was just wind noise and footsteps, then a man's voice speaking. Quietly, Daniel recognized the voice. Immediately, it was Eric. The tape recording lasted almost 9 minutes. For most of it, Eric sounded terrified, breathing hard, whispering constantly. At one point he said, "It keeps standing outside the tent. It keeps asking me to come outside." Then there was silence for a while, and near the end of the recording, Eric suddenly started crying, not yelling, not screaming, crying like somebody completely broken, and the last thing captured on the tape was Eric whispering, "It learned my voice." Then came another voice, perfectly identical to Eric's, repeating the exact same sentence back to him. "Learned my voice." The tape ended there. No struggle, no scream, nothing. After hearing that recording, Daniel finally moved away from Montana. He never hunted again, never camped again, and according to my aunt, he still refuses to drive through heavily wooded areas after sunset. But the reason he finally told me this story in 2018 was because of something that happened only a few days earlier. Daniel had received a phone call late at night from an unknown number. When he answered, nobody spoke for almost 15 seconds, just faint breathing. Then a voice quietly said, "Daniel, Come outside for a second." My uncle hung up immediately, and according to him, when he checked outside his kitchen window afterward, he saw somebody standing near the trees beyond his backyard, tall, still watching. The house now? Maybe somebody was playing a cruel prank. Maybe somebody somehow learned about Eric, maybe? There's a rational explanation for all of it, but here's the part that still bothers me. My uncle lives in Arizona now. There are no forests anywhere near his home. And yet, the next morning, police found muddy, barefoot footprints outside his backyard fence. Human footprints. Only the distance between each step was way too far apart, like whatever left them wasn't walking normally. And before I left Thanksgiving dinner that night, my uncle grabbed my arm and told me one final thing, something he'd apparently never told anyone else before, the night Eric disappeared. Right before Daniel drove away from the tower, he looked into the rearview mirror one last time, and for maybe half a second, he saw dozens of figures standing between the trees, tall, motionless, watching the truck leave, every single one of them wearing a human face. But that wasn't the part that haunted him most. It was what happened right before the road curved out of the forest, because just before the trees disappeared behind him, every single one of those figures smiled at the exact same time. Not wide smiles, not exaggerated, just small, unnatural smiles, like they were happy he'd finally noticed them. And as the truck sped farther away, Daniel realized something even worse. Some of the faces standing among those trees weren't strangers. One of them looked exactly like Eric. Another looked like the old forestry worker whose missing poster used to hang inside the gas station near town, and another looked almost identical to Daniel himself. Same eyes, same haircut, same face, only standing perfectly still between the trees. With an expressionless smile, Daniel slammed on the gas. After that, he said he drove nearly 90 miles an hour down those mountain roads, trying not to look into the mirror again, but curiosity finally got the better of him, and when he checked the rearview mirror one last time, the road behind him was completely empty. No figures, no headlights, nothing except, way back in the darkness near the forest entrance, one single flashlight beam, slowly swaying back and forth, like somebody was still searching for him. In the summer of 2018, I took a temporary forestry job in northern Montana because I needed money, distance, and quiet. I had just come out of the worst year of my life. By June, I was sleeping on my brother's couch in Spokane, checking my bank account every morning before he woke up. So when a seasonal forestry position opened near Flathead National Forest, I accepted it immediately. The work sounded simple. Drive supplies, check access roads, move equipment between ranger stations, and occasionally deliver crates to remote fire lookout towers. The station sat almost 2 hours from town, at the end of a dirt road. 6 of us worked there that season. Dale was the supervisor, big guy, late 50s, always chewing tobacco, always looking irritated. Elise handled dispatch. Mark repaired radios. Ken and Luis drove the harder mountain routes, and Jonah was the only other new hire besides me. On my first morning, Dale gave me the only rule he seemed to care about. Do your route. Keep the radio on. Get back before dark. At first, I thought it was standard wilderness safety, but after a few days, I realized the others treated that rule much more seriously than normal. Nobody volunteered for late runs. Nobody stayed outside once the sun started dropping. And every evening, around sunset, the station became quiet. Not peaceful quiet. Uneasy quiet. Like everyone was waiting for something. The first time I heard someone mention Lookout 14, I was filling my thermos near the break table. Ken was joking about raccoons getting into one of the storage towers when Mark walked past and muttered, "At least it wasn't 14. Lee stopped writing. Ken looked down at the floor, and from inside his office, Dale said, "That tower isn't on anyone's route anymore." Mark didn't answer. Nobody did. Conversation just died. Later that afternoon, I asked Jonah what Lookout 14 was. The reaction on his face was immediate, like I had accidentally said something offensive. "You don't want to go there," he said quietly. "Why?" He shrugged too fast. "Because everybody who gets curious about that tower eventually wants to see it." That answer bothered me more than if he had said it was haunted. Over the next week, I kept noticing strange things. Lookout 14 still appeared on the station supply board. Most days the line beside it stayed empty. But occasionally, someone added supplies beside the number. The handwriting always looked fresh, but nobody ever talked about delivering them. And according to Dale, nobody worked there anymore. One afternoon, while helping Luis unload fuel cans, I asked what happened at the tower. He looked around before answering. That alone made my stomach tighten. "There are places in these mountains where people stop acting normal," he said. "What's that supposed to mean?" He wiped sweat from his forehead slowly. "People hear things out there, like animals?" Luis shook his head. "No, not animals." Before I could ask anything else, Dale shouted for us from across the yard. Luis immediately walked away. That night, I found Lookout 14 marked on an old wall map inside the equipment room. Someone had scratched a dark X over the tower symbol. Then I noticed something else. The route trail leading toward the tower had been partially erased. Not crossed out, erased. Like somebody wanted the tower hidden. But curiosity is a stupid thing, especially when everyone acts like they're hiding something. Then June 27th happened. The radios kept cutting in and out all day. Around 3 in the afternoon, Elise walked into the garage holding a clipboard. Her expression told me I wasn't going to like it. "Dale needs you." I found him standing beside an older green forestry truck. Water jugs, a battery case, a canvas bag, and a wooden crate sat in the back. He didn't look at me while speaking. "I need you to make a supply drop." "Where?" He paused, then finally answered. "Lookout 14 for a second." I thought he was joking. Then I saw his face. He wasn't joking. "Drop the supplies outside the tower," he said. "Do not stay long. Do not touch anything already there. And if weather turns bad, you leave immediately." I stared at him. I thought nobody worked there anymore. They don't. Then why are we still bringing supplies? Dale finally looked directly at me, and for the first time since meeting him, I saw genuine fear in his eyes, because somebody keeps taking them. I tried laughing it off. "So somebody's living there illegally?" "No," the way he answered made my chest tighten. Before I climbed into the truck, Dale handed me a folded paper map. "The GPS will stop working after the creek crossing," he said. Then he grabbed my wrist before I could close the door. "One more thing." "What?" "If you hear knocking," he hesitated, "don't knock back." So I drove. At first, the road looked normal enough. Gravel path. Thick pine forest. But after the creek crossing, the GPS screen froze exactly like Dale said it would. The forest also became noticeably quieter. Then slowly, those sounds disappeared too. Just tires grinding against dirt. Even the truck engine suddenly sounded too loud. The silence out there didn't feel natural. It felt heavy, like the forest itself was listening. Then the radio crackled. I grabbed it immediately. "This is Unit 3. "Go ahead," Static answered back. Then, underneath the static, I heard humming. Very faint. A man humming softly to himself. The sound was distorted, like an old recording underwater. "Hello?" The humming stopped instantly. Complete silence returned. I tried calling dispatch again. Nothing answered. Then the radio burst with static hard enough to make me jump. After that, it died completely. About 20 minutes later, I reached the end of the access road. A clearing opened near the base of the trail, and sitting there beside a leaning sign was another forestry truck. My first reaction was relief, but that feeling disappeared almost immediately. The driver's side door was hanging open. The hood was cold. One tire had gone completely flat, and the keys still sat inside the ignition. I stepped out slowly. "Hello?" Nothing answered back. The forest stayed silent. Then I noticed the dark smear stretched across the steering wheel. Mud. A clipboard rested on the passenger seat. Across the top, in faded ink, was the name T. Harlan. I had never heard that name before. I called out again. Every instinct told me to leave. But instead, I grabbed the supply crate and started hiking the trail upward. The climb took around 20 minutes, and almost immediately, I began feeling like something was following me, not close enough to see. Just matching my pace somewhere deeper in the trees. Every time I stopped walking, the feeling stopped too. Then it continued again the second I moved. Halfway up the trail, I heard footsteps behind me. Clear footsteps. I turned around instantly. Nothing. Just rows of dark pine trees disappearing into fog. Then, from somewhere lower on the slope, I heard 3 soft clicking noises. Click, 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 like somebody clicking their tongue. I stood frozen, trying to listen. Then, from somewhere above me, came a loud wooden knock. My eyes slowly lifted toward the tower, and through the trees. I finally saw Lookout 14. The structure stood above the forest line, tall and crooked against the darkening sky. Most fire lookout towers look peaceful. This one didn't. It looked wrong. The cabin leaned slightly to one side. The windows were completely black. And hanging beneath the platform were dozens of long black wires moving gently in the wind. At first I thought they were radio cables. Then I got closer. Some had been tied into knots. Some held feathers. Others held strips of old cloth. One held a cracked plastic name tag. At the base of the stairs, words were scratched into the wood. "Don't count the steps." That was the exact moment fear became real. Then something knocked from inside the cabin above me. I nearly dropped the crate. A second knock came from beneath the platform, hidden somewhere underneath the tower itself. I remembered Dale's warning immediately. If you hear knocking, don't knock back. I forced myself onto the stairs. The wood groaned loudly beneath my boots. And no matter how hard I tried not to, I started counting the steps anyway. 1, 2, 3. By the time I reached the first landing, I was already at 27. The higher I climbed, the colder the air became. Then came the smell. Rot. When I finally reached the top platform, I set the supplies down fast. The cabin door sat partially open. I should have left right then instead. The radio inside suddenly crackled to life. The sound exploded through the silence. The cabin door slowly drifted open wider. Dust covered everything inside. Radio equipment layered in dirt. The place looked abandoned for years. Except for one thing. Wet footprints crossed the dusty floorboards. Bare human footprints. Fresh mud still glistened. They began at the doorway, crossed the room, and stopped directly in front of the radio desk. Then the speaker crackled again, and through the static, I heard a man whisper, "Don't look outside." My entire body locked up. The voice came again, weaker this time. "Don't let it know you heard me." For a second, I felt the whole tower breathing under me. Not moving exactly, breathing. Like something huge had pressed its chest against the wood below. Then, directly beneath my feet, something knocked from under the floorboards. Once, twice, 3 times. I froze completely. Every muscle in my body locked the second the third knock echoed beneath the floorboards. Once, twice, 3 times. Then silence. Not normal silence. The kind of silence where your brain starts filling in sounds that aren't there. My eyes stayed fixed on the floor beneath me. The old wood looked warped, damp in certain places, like something underneath had been breathing moisture upward for years. Then the radio crackled again. A burst of static exploded from the speaker, and through it, the same man whispered, "Don't move." I stopped breathing. The voice sounded terrified now, not warning me anymore, begging me. Then came another sound from below the tower, a slow creaking noise, wood bending under weight. Something was climbing, very slowly. The entire staircase groaned once beneath me. Then again, I backed away from the cabin doorway instinctively. The radio hissed louder. You counted the steps. Didn't you? My throat tightened immediately. I hadn't told anyone that. Nobody could have known. The voice continued. How many? I couldn't answer. The stairs creaked again. Closer this time. Then came the sound that still wakes me up at night. Breathing, not human breathing. Too deep, too wet, like massive lungs dragging air through a throat full of liquid. I slowly turned toward the staircase. Nothing was visible yet. Only darkness wrapping around the lower steps. Then another creak echoed upward. One step higher. I backed deeper into the cabin. The floorboards groaned softly under my boots. And that was when I noticed something else inside the room. The walls. At first, I thought the dark marks covering them were water stains. Then I got closer. They weren't stains. They were tally marks. Thousands of them. Scratched directly into the wood. Some old, some fresh. Entire sections of wall had been carved over and over again. Lines grouped in sets of 5. Someone had spent a very long time counting something inside that tower. Then I noticed words carved beneath the window beside the radio desk. It pretends to be people, another line underneath said. Don't answer the voices in beneath that. It hates being ignored. The staircase creaked again. Another step, closer. My eyes slowly lifted toward the doorway. Still nothing visible. But the breathing had become louder now, slow, heavy, patient. The radio crackled violently. Then the voice whispered, It knows you're inside now. The tower suddenly shifted beneath me. Not enough to collapse. Just enough to feel movement. Like something enormous had leaned against one of the support beams below. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Another loud creak echoed upward from the stairs. Then came footsteps. Actual footsteps? Slow, deliberate. Climbing one step at a time. My heart started hammering so hard it hurt. I moved toward the far side of the cabin near the windows. And that was my first mistake. Because the second I glanced outside, I saw someone standing near the tree line below. A man, forestry uniform, facing away from the tower, perfectly still. At first, relief hit me instantly. Another worker. Maybe the owner of the abandoned truck. Then the man slowly lifted one arm upward and pointed directly into the forest behind him. Not toward the tower. Toward the trees. Toward something deeper out there. I pressed closer to the window, trying to see what he was pointing at. That was when the radio screamed with static. Don't look at him. The voice was suddenly louder, panicked. He isn't real. The man below began twitching strangely. Small movements at first, his shoulders jerking unnaturally. Then his neck tilted sideways, far too slowly, far too far, until his head sat at an angle no human spine should allow. My stomach dropped instantly. Then the figure smiled. Even from that distance, I could see the smile stretching too wide across his face. And slowly, very slowly, the thing pretending to be human turned toward the tower. Its eyes looked completely black. The staircase creaked again behind me. Closer now. I spun around. Still nothing visible. But the breathing had reached the top platform. I could hear it directly outside the cabin door. Wet. Heavy, slow. The floor beneath. The doorway suddenly bent downward slightly, like something massive had stepped onto the platform outside. I backed away instinctively. The breathing stopped. Then came a voice outside the cabin. Dale's voice. Open the door? Every hair on my body stood up immediately. It sounded exactly like him. Perfectly. Truck broke down, the voice said calmly. Need you to open the door? The radio crackled violently. That isn't Dale. I stared at the doorway without moving. Then the voice outside laughed softly. Not loudly, just quietly amused. Smart boy. The thing outside began walking slowly around the tower cabin. Its footsteps circled the walls one side at a time, and everywhere it stepped, the wood creaked under impossible weight. I backed closer to the radio desk, trying to keep breathing quietly. Then another voice came from outside. This time, Elise, you need to answer dispatch. Perfect imitation. Same tone, same pacing. Then Jonah's voice, then Luis, one after another. Like something outside had listened to all of them for years. The thing circled the cabin while mimicking every person I knew, sometimes whispering, sometimes laughing softly, sometimes scratching long nails against the outer walls. The radio crackled again. You have to stay quiet. The frightened man on the radio sounded weaker now, like he was struggling to breathe. It gets angry if you don't answer, but it gets closer if you do. What is it? I whispered. For several seconds, only static answered. Then finally, I don't know. The tower suddenly shook hard enough to rattle the windows. Something enormous slammed against one of the lower support beams. Dust exploded from the ceiling. The radio nearly tipped sideways. Outside, the fake voices stopped completely. And for the first time since reaching the tower, the forest itself made noise again. Branches snapping, leaves rustling, movement everywhere below, like dozens of things had started circling through the trees all at once. Then came the sound of footsteps running up the staircase. Fast, too fast. The tower vibrated violently beneath each impact. Thud, thud, thud. The thing reached the top platform in seconds. The breathing returned immediately outside the door. Louder than ever now, then silence. I stared at the doorway, unable to move, and slowly, a shadow appeared beneath the crack under the cabin door. Not human-shaped, too tall, too wide. Then came a soft knock against the wood. Once, twice, 3 times. The fake Dale voice whispered from the other side, "You forgot to count the rest of the steps." Then the doorknob slowly began turning. The doorknob slowly turned. Not aggressively, not like something trying to break in. Slowly, carefully. Like whatever stood outside already knew the door wasn't locked. I backed away until my legs hit the radio desk. The knob stopped moving. Then came another soft knock. Once, twice, 3 times. The fake Dale voice whispered through the wood, "You missed 4 steps." My chest tightened instantly, because without even realizing it, I had counted 27 steps to the first landing earlier. And suddenly my brain replayed the climb automatically. 27. Then another set. Then another. My stomach dropped. 40. I had climbed 40 steps total. The voice outside laughed softly. "You finally remembered." The radio burst alive beside me. "Do not answer, The frightened man's voice sounded distorted now, weak, like he was speaking through water. "If it finishes the count, it can come inside." The tower suddenly shook hard enough to throw dust from the ceiling. Outside, something scraped slowly across the walls. Long nails dragging through old wood. The fake voice whispered again. 40 steps. The cabin temperature dropped immediately. Cold air spread through the room so fast I could suddenly see my breath. Then the windows began fogging from the outside. Not inside. Outside. Like something enormous was breathing directly against the glass. I turned slowly toward the nearest window, and instantly wished I hadn't. A face stared back at me from inches beyond the glass. Not human. Not even close. Pale gray skin stretched too tightly across a long skull. Huge black eyes. No eyelids. And a smile carved so wide it split the cheeks nearly to the ears. The thing's head tilted slowly sideways while staring directly at me. Then another face appeared beside it. Then another. All smiling. All staring silently into the tower. My entire body locked up. The radio crackled violently again. It makes copies. The terrified voice was almost screaming now. "Don't let them inside." The faces outside the window suddenly vanished all at once. Then every side of the tower exploded with knocking. Bang, bang, bang. The entire structure shook violently. Windows rattled. Dust filled the air. Something huge slammed against the support beams below, hard enough to make the whole tower lean sideways for a second. I grabbed the radio desperately. What do I do? Static hissed loudly. Then the man answered, "You have to leave before dark." And my blood went cold. The forest beyond the tower had become almost completely black. Sunset was already disappearing behind the mountains. "How?" I shouted. The stairs. Another violent impact slammed into the tower. The fake voices outside began screaming all at once now. Not talking anymore. Screaming. Dozens of voices overlapping together. Dale, Elise, Luis, Jonah. People I recognized. People I didn't. Some crying. Some laughing. Some begging for help. The noise became unbearable. Then suddenly, complete silence returned. Every sound stopped instantly. The radio emitted one final crackle, and the frightened man whispered, "It's behind you." I turned. The cabin door stood open. I never heard it open. The platform outside sat empty. No movement. No breathing. Nothing. Then something dripped onto the floorboards behind me. I slowly looked upward, and my entire body went numb. Something was attached to the ceiling directly above the doorway. Tall, skinny, folded unnaturally, against the wood like a spider. Its limbs bent the wrong direction. Long black hair hung down over its face, and its arms were impossibly long. The fingers nearly touched the floor. It smiled slowly as I stared at it. The same impossible smile from outside the window. Then its jaw began opening wider and wider, far beyond human limits. I ran. The creature dropped from the ceiling the exact second I reached the doorway. The impact shook the tower behind me. I sprinted down the stairs so fast my boots slipped twice on the wet wood. Behind me, something slammed onto the staircase. The sounds it made while chasing me still don't feel real. Not footsteps. Too fast. Too uneven. Like multiple limbs hitting the wood at once. The tower shook violently beneath every impact. I jumped the last several steps and hit the ground hard enough to nearly break my ankle. Then I heard the thing stop above me. Complete silence. I looked up. The creature stood halfway down the staircase, crouched unnaturally low while gripping the rails with both hands. Its eyes reflected pale white in the darkness. And slowly, it began counting. 36. Its voice sounded wrong, like multiple people speaking underneath it. 37. I backed away slowly through the dirt. The creature's smile widened further. 38. Then movement exploded everywhere in the trees behind me. Dozens of pale figures stepped silently between the pines. All tall, all skinny, all smiling. Every single one facing me. 39. I turned and ran into the forest. Branches whipped across my face. Roots nearly threw me to the ground. Behind me, I could hear things moving through the trees at impossible speed, not chasing directly, keeping pace, circling. The clicking noises returned from every direction. Click, click, click. Then came the final number behind me. 40. The forest went completely silent again. Immediately, every sound disappeared. Even my own footsteps suddenly sounded muffled. Then something whispered directly beside my ear, "You finished the count." I screamed and stumbled downhill blindly through the dark. At some point, I lost the trail completely. I just kept running until I finally saw headlights through the trees. The abandoned forestry truck. I nearly fell reaching it. The keys still sat in the ignition. I threw myself inside and started the engine instantly. The truck barely turned over at first, then finally roared to life. And right before I slammed the door shut, I saw movement standing between the trees ahead of me. Tall figures. Dozens of them. Perfectly still. Smiling, one stood closer than the others. Forestry uniform. Head tilted sideways. T. Harlan, mud covered his bare feet. And even from inside the truck, I could hear him softly clicking his tongue. Click, click, click. I drove without turning on the headlights. for nearly 5 minutes because my hands were shaking too badly. When I finally reached the station, it was almost midnight. Dale was standing outside waiting. Not surprised. Not confused. Waiting. The second he saw me alone. His face changed. "Did you answer it?" he asked immediately. I could barely breathe. What the hell is up there? Dale ignored the question. "Did you answer it?" "No." He stared at me for several seconds, then quietly asked, "Did it finish the count?" My stomach dropped immediately, because I hadn't told him anything about the stairs, or the counting, or the voices. Dale looked toward the dark forest behind me, and for the first time since I met him, I saw genuine fear in his face. Then he said something I still think about constantly. "Then it knows your name now." I quit the next morning, packed my things before sunrise. And while leaving the station, I noticed something sitting beside the passenger door of my truck. A small wooden carving, one of the staircase steps from Lookout 14. The number 41 had been carved deeply into it, and underneath the number, someone had scratched my name. In October of 2021, I took a freelance audio job recording environmental sounds near Blackwater Lake in northern Oregon. At the time, it sounded easy. A small independent production company wanted isolated nature recordings for a horror game they were developing. Wind through trees, water movement, cabin ambience, footsteps in mud, stuff like that. They were paying almost $4,000 for 5 nights of recording. And honestly, I needed the money badly enough not to ask many questions. The job contact came through a guy named Warren, middle-aged, fast talker. Always sounded distracted on the phone. When he explained the assignment, he kept emphasizing one thing repeatedly. "The lake has to stay in the recordings." "What do you mean?" "I mean, don't hike too far away from it. The client specifically wants the ambiance from the shoreline." At first, I assumed he'd just meant the acoustics mattered. But the more he talked, the stranger the conversation became. "Whatever happens out there," he said, "don't record after 2 a.m. I laughed a little. "Why?" Long pause. Then, "Because the locals don't go outside after 2. That answer should have been enough warning. Instead, I thought it sounded interesting. 3 days later, I drove north with around $6,000 worth of recording equipment packed in my SUV, field microphones, directional rigs, battery packs, night cameras, portable sound mixers. Most of the drive passed through isolated mountain roads surrounded by pine forest. And the farther north I went, the fewer signs of civilization I saw. Gas stations disappeared. Cell service became inconsistent. Even radio stations faded into static. Around sunset, I finally reached the small town nearest Blackwater Lake. Calling it a town honestly feels generous. One diner. Tiny gas station. General store. Maybe 15 buildings total. Most looked abandoned. The first strange thing I noticed was how people reacted when I mentioned the lake. Inside the diner, I asked the waitress if the shoreline road was still accessible. The woman immediately stopped smiling. "Why?" "I'm doing recording work." "For who?" "Independent media company." She stared at me for several seconds, then quietly asked, "You staying there overnight?" "Yeah." The woman slowly shook her head. "You shouldn't." Before I could ask why, an older man sitting nearby interrupted. "What cabin?" I looked at him. Gray beard, hunter's cap, weathered face. I checked the address Warren had sent me. Cabin 6. The man immediately looked away. The waitress stopped talking completely. And suddenly, the entire diner felt uncomfortable. I remember laughing awkwardly. "What?" Nobody answered. Finally, the old man muttered something quietly into his coffee. "What did you say?" He looked directly at me. "Leave the lake before 2 a.m. Same warning Warren gave me. That uneasy feeling started growing in my stomach immediately. I paid for my food and left soon after. The road leading toward Blackwater Lake stretched nearly 30 minutes through dense forest. No houses, no lights, no other vehicles. By the time I reached the lake, night had almost fully settled over the mountains. And honestly, the place looked beautiful at first. Still black water reflecting moonlight. Huge pine trees surrounding the shoreline. Light fog drifting above the surface. Everything completely silent except distant water movement. Then I saw the cabins. There were 6 total. Old wooden rental cabins sitting far apart along the shoreline road. Most looked empty. Some had collapsed porches. One appeared partially burned. Cabin 6 sat furthest from the others near the northern side of the lake. The moment I stepped out of the SUV, I noticed the smell. Wet wood, lake water, and something faint underneath it. Rot, not strong, just barely noticeable. The cabin itself looked old, but usable. Small kitchen, single bedroom, wood stove, battery-powered lanterns, and strangely enough, an old radio sitting on the kitchen counter, not modern. One of those large black emergency radios with weather frequencies. A handwritten note had been taped beside it. "Don't open the door if the radio turns on by itself." I stared at the note for several seconds. At first, I genuinely thought Warren was messing with me, trying to create atmosphere because the project involved horror audio. But something about the handwriting bothered me. It looked shaky, uneven, like somebody wrote it while panicking. I actually took a picture of the note because I thought it was funny at the time. I wish I hadn't. Around 11 p.m. I started my first shoreline recording session. The forest around the lake became unbelievably dark after sunset. Not city dark, real darkness. The kind where your flashlight feels too small. I set microphones near the shoreline and began collecting ambient audio. Water movement, branches creaking, wind through trees. For about an hour, everything felt normal. Then, at exactly 1:13 a.m., the lake made a sound. At first, I thought it was an animal, a low noise somewhere across the water. But then it happened again. Longer this time, it sounded almost human, like someone calling from very far away. I removed my headphones immediately and listened carefully. Nothing, only water. Then through the headphones again, the sound returned. A woman's voice, soft, distant, crying. My chest tightened instantly because the voice sounded close through the recording equipment. But the lake itself remained completely silent. I slowly turned my microphone gain higher. The crying became clearer. Then words started forming underneath it. "Help me." I froze immediately. The voice sounded like it was coming from somewhere far out on the water. "Please." The crying grew louder. And suddenly, I realized something horrifying. The sound wasn't reaching my ears naturally. Only the microphones could hear it. I backed away from the equipment instinctively. Then the woman screamed. The sound blasted through my headphones so loudly, I ripped them off immediately. And at that exact second, the emergency radio inside cabin 6 turned on by itself. Loud static exploded through the darkness behind me. I spun toward the cabin. The radio volume was unbelievably loud now. Static roaring through the trees, then through the distortion. I heard a man whisper, "Don't let her reach the shore." My blood went cold instantly, because the cabin door behind the radio was slowly opening by itself. The cabin door slowly creaked open behind the radio. Not fast, not dramatic, just slowly enough to make my stomach tighten. The emergency radio continued blasting static across the shoreline and through the noise. The man whispered again, "Don't let her reach the shore." I stood frozen beside my recording equipment. The lake behind me had gone, completely still. No wind, no water movement, nothing. Then came the crying again. This time, I heard it without the headphones, very faint, somewhere far out across the lake. A woman sobbing softly in the darkness. I grabbed my flashlight immediately and pointed it toward the water at first. I couldn't see anything, just black water reflecting. Moonlight, then the beam caught movement. Something pale floating far from shore, human-shape. My chest tightened. Instantly, The crying became louder, and slowly. The shape in the water started moving closer. Not swimming, gliding, no splashing, no visible movement beneath the surface. Just drifting silently toward land. The radio crackled violently. "Turn off the light." The sudden scream made me jump hard enough to almost drop the flashlight. Pointed it back toward the cabin. The radio hissed with static again. Then the man whispered, "She sees light." I immediately shut the flashlight. Off. Darkness swallowed the shoreline. Instantly, my breathing sounded painfully loud. The crying continued from the lake, closer now, much closer. I slowly backed toward cabin 6 without taking my eyes. Off the water, the radio volume suddenly lowered on its own, then through the static. The same voice asked quietly, "Did she look at you?" I swallowed hard. "What?" The man ignored the question. "Did she see your face?" Before I could answer, something moved in the trees behind the cabin. Fast branches snapped somewhere in the darkness, then silence again. The radio emitted another burst of static. "You need to get inside." Now, I didn't argue. I grabbed my equipment and practically stumbled through the front door. The second I stepped inside, the radio volume dropped completely. Only faint static remained. I slammed the cabin door shut and locked it. Immediately, then I noticed something strange. The room smelled different now, stronger. That same faint rotten smell I noticed earlier near the lake. Only now, it felt fresh, like wet decay. I slowly turned around and nearly screamed. There were wet footprints on the wooden floor. Bare human footprints. They started near the kitchen window and led directly toward the hallway beside the bedroom. Every footprint glistened with lake water. My heart started hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. The radio crackled softly behind me. "She got inside before you." I grabbed the radio. What the hell is happening? For several seconds, only static answered. Then finally, cabin 6 was supposed to stay empty. The voice sounded exhausted, weak, like the man hadn't slept in days. "Who are you?" Long pause. Then, "I used to watch the lake." My stomach tightened immediately. "What does that mean?" Another long silence. Then the man quietly answered, "It means I'm the reason they stopped renting the cabins." Something moved in the hallway, soft, slow, like wet skin brushing lightly against wood. I turned toward the darkness immediately. Nothing visible but the smell of lake. Water had become much stronger. The radio hissed softly, "Don't follow them. Footprints." That warning alone made me take one step backward. Crying outside suddenly stopped. Instantly, no fade, no gradual silence, just gone. And the moment it stopped, I heard something breathing inside the cabin, not from the hallway, closer, much closer. I looked toward the bedroom doorway. The darkness inside looked deeper, somehow wrong. Then something shifted inside the room, a small movement, like somebody slowly adjusting their posture while standing. In the dark, the radio crackled loudly. She copies voices. After she hears them, my chest tightened. "What is she?" The man answered immediately, "This time dead." A loud knock suddenly exploded. Against the cabin wall, I jumped so hard, the radio nearly slipped from my hands. Then another knock came from the back side of the cabin. Then another from the roof. Bang, bang, bang. Something was moving around outside. Fast. The footsteps sounded wet, heavy like soaked feet slamming against wood. Then came a woman's voice directly outside the front door, soft, weak. "Please, help me." Every hair on my body stood up immediately. The voice sounded identical to the crying from the lake. "Please." A wet hand slowly dragged across the outside of the door. "I'm cold." The radio burst with static. "Do not open it." I backed away immediately. The woman outside began crying harder. Now, not loud, quiet, broken, like somebody genuinely terrified. Please let me inside. Then came another voice outside, a man this time. Hey. I froze. The voice sounded normal, human. Anybody in there? Relief hit me instantly. Another person, maybe someone from town. The man pounded on the door again. Open up. The radio crackled violently. That isn't a person anymore. My stomach dropped instantly outside. The man laughed softly, not normal. Laughter. Wrong laughter. Too slow, too uneven. Then, more voices joined him outside the cabin, women, children, men, dozens of them whispering around the walls. Some crying, some laughing quietly, some begging to be let inside. The sounds moved around the cabin in circles every few seconds. Something wet slapped against the windows. The radio hissed softly. They drowned a long time ago. I stared at it. What? The lake keeps them. Another loud impact slammed against the cabin wall, hard enough to shake the lantern. Then suddenly, all the voices outside stopped at once. Complete silence returned. The radio emitted one low burst of static, and the man whispered, "She found your reflection." Out. My blood went cold, because beside the kitchen sink, the dark window reflected the inside of the cabin, and standing behind me in the reflection was a pale woman covered in lake water, long, black hair hanging over her face, bare feet, head tilted sideways. Unnaturally, I spun around instantly. Nothing there. The bedroom door slowly creaked open, empty. Not all the way. Reflection behind just me enough for darkness to spill into the hallway. The bedroom door slowly began frozen near the kitchen table, staring at the gap between the door and the frame. The reflection in the window still showed the woman standing behind me, smiling. But when I turned around, the room stayed empty. The radio crackled softly. Don't look at reflections anymore. My breathing had become shallow now, fast, uneven. What the hell is she? I whispered. For several seconds, only static answered. Then the man finally spoke again. She was the first one. A loud dripping sound interrupted him. Water. Somewhere inside the cabin. Drip, drip, drip. The smell of lake water had become overwhelming now. Rotting algae, wet wood, decay. I slowly looked down. Water had started spreading across the floorboards from inside the bedroom. Dark lake water slowly creeping toward my boots. Then something moved inside the room. A soft shifting motion, like somebody crawling slowly across the floor. The radio hissed loudly. She only moves when you stop hearing her. The crying outside had completely stopped earlier, which meant she wasn't outside anymore. A cold wave spread through my entire body. Then the bedroom floor creaked. Slowly, carefully, something was moving closer to the doorway. I grabbed the lantern beside the table and backed toward the front door. The radio crackled again. If she asks to come closer, don't answer. I stared into the darkness without blinking, and slowly, a hand slid out across the floorboards. Pale gray skin, long black fingernails. Water dripping constantly from the fingertips. Then another hand appeared beside it, and her face. The woman slowly crawled into view. Her movements looked horribly wrong. Not smooth, not human. Her arms bent too far. Long, wet hair covered most of her face, but I could still see the smile underneath. That impossible smile. Wide, empty. The radio suddenly screamed with static. She sees you now. The woman's head snapped upward instantly, and for the first time, I saw her eyes clearly. It's completely black. No whites, no pupils. Just endless dark holes staring directly into me. Then she spoke, and the voice that came out was mine. Please help me. The thing wearing the woman's shape copied my voice perfectly. Exact tone, exact pacing. Then it smiled wider and copied me again. The creature suddenly jerked forward across the floor, unbelievably fast. I stumbled backward and slammed into the front door. The lantern fell from my hand and shattered. Darkness swallowed the cabin instantly. Then came the sound of wet crawling directly in front of me. The radio crackled through the dark. Light hurts her. I dropped to the floor, desperately searching for my flashlight. Wet fingers brushed across my boot, kicked instinctively, and felt something thin and cold grab my ankle for half a second. Then the crying started again, except now it came from inside the cabin, right beside me. I finally found the flashlight and turned it on. The beam illuminated the room. The woman crouched against the ceiling directly above the kitchen doorway, water dripping from her body. The light made her twitch violently, body jerked backward against the ceiling like an insect recoiling from heat. Then every radio frequency exploded with noise at once, screaming, crying, begging, and the same exhausted man yelling, "Get out of the cabin." The creature dropped from the ceiling immediately. I ran. The front door burst open as I threw myself outside. I sprinted toward the SUV. Behind me, wet footsteps slammed across the cabin porch. Fast. Too fast.
Ow.
I reached the driver's side door and nearly dropped the keys. Then I heard my own voice behind me. "Wait, don't leave me here." Looked back for 1 second. Big mistake. The pale woman stood halfway between the cabin and the shoreline. Except now, there were others standing beside her. More wet figures slowly emerging from the darkness near the lake. Men, women, children, all soaked, all smiling, all staring directly at me. Then they spoke in my voice. "Come back." I finally got inside the SUV and slammed the door shut. The engine turned over once, then died. Outside, the drowned figures started walking slowly toward the vehicle, calmly, like they already knew I couldn't leave. The radio inside the SUV suddenly crackled alive. I looked at her reflection too long. "Q, don't belong to yourself anymore." The first drowned figure reached the SUV. A little girl. Water poured from her mouth while she smiled through broken teeth. Then more figures surrounded the vehicle, wet hands pressing softly against the windows. The pale woman stood furthest back. Then the SUV engine suddenly started on its own. I didn't wait. I slammed the accelerator immediately. The vehicle tore down the shoreline road. I kept hearing wet knocking sounds from the roof of the SUV. Slow, steady. I never looked, not once. By the time I reached town, dawn had almost arrived. I practically stumbled into the diner. The waitress saw my face and immediately stopped moving. "You stayed after, too," she whispered. The old man from before sat silently near the window. When he saw me, he quietly asked, "Did she speak with your voice?" The old man slowly nodded to himself. "She'll keep practicing until she sounds exactly like you." For weeks after returning home, I kept hearing water dripping inside my apartment at night. At first I thought it was stress. Then one night around 2:13 a.m., the emergency weather radio inside my kitchen turned on by itself. I don't even own a weather radio. Static filled the apartment, and through the distortion, I heard my own voice whisper, "Please let me inside."